new report by the International Financing Corporation and the World Bank finds that of the 50 economies making the most improvements in business regulation for domestic firms since 2005, 17 are in sub-Saharan Africa. Joining us now to discuss the latest World Bank Doing Business report for small business enterprises is David Bridgman, World Bank Group Senior Manager for Investment Climate in Africa. Mr. Bridgman, thank you so much for joining us. Good news for Africa, 17 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. What do you ascribe the improvement to?
Yes, it's confirmation of a trend we've seen over the last few years. Really, when this report started, it's now the 10th year we've been doing this report. When we started it 10 years ago, Sub-Saharan Africa contributed about 12% of the reforms we were able to identify globally. These are reforms across a whole array of activities which make it easier or more difficult to do business in a country. And Sub-Saharan Africa definitely lagged then. But over the last 5-7 years, year after year, there's been an increase and uptake. Over the last 7 years, Sub-Saharan Africa has contributed 25% of the reforms globally. And as we look now at the countries which have made the biggest reform, we're now focusing, we've now got 10 years of data, so we're not looking at what happened last year as much as the sustained reform.
And you can actually track
year
patterns.
after year after year, and 17 of the top 50 countries in making sustained reforms come from Sub-Saharan Africa.
Now we know that the countries that are standing out are countries like Burundi, countries like Rwanda. What would you ascribe they're doing well to? Is it the fact that they have sound policies in place? Is it more democracy, better accountability? What is the key driver for them doing better?
Well, the countries you mentioned, Rwanda, Burundi, and you can add to it Sierra Leone and Liberia, these are countries which come from a history of conflict. And what very often happens in societies, they hit a crisis and they say, actually, the status quo is not an option. We have to change. And so many of the vested interests which otherwise slow down reform are not able to be as effective. So you get a swift reforming movement. And that's been part of what's happened in Sub-Saharan Africa. But there have also been the solid steadies, the Mauritius, which is now in the top 20 of the world. The Seychelles has come up, Botswana is doing nicely. There's solid countries reforming year after year, but a lot of it is also those conflict countries who know they have to change.
So let's take the conflict countries. I mean, that's obviously off a very low base. Like you say, it's quick, rapid, quick wins in a way. But we are talking about other countries like your Seychelles, your Botswanas, who are over a period introducing measures. Take us through what those measures are. When you say doing, ease of doing business, is it just the question of lowering, the cost of doing business? Is it a better regulatory environment or a combination of the two?
It's basically mainly a better regulatory environment. It's not a less regulatory environment, it's a better regulatory environment. So one of the things we track, for instance, which is a popular reform in Africa, is how easy is it to set up a business? And if you have a situation which we did 10 years ago, where if you wanted to start up a company, you could spend a year or longer going through all the steps and pay something like 5 times your per capita income just to get a company registered. And without a company registered, you don't have access to credit, you don't have access to government tenders, you don't have access to training grants. So all those things which make it possible for businesses to grow, you didn't have. Now, as we've looked globally, we find that in the same industry, in the same size, businesses which are formal are more successful than businesses which are not formal. Their job growth goes up, etc. So we don't want to close down an informal sector, but we want to make it easy for the successful companies to graduate to formality and then go ahead. So that's a common one, is starting a business. Then there is the issue of licenses, and we take commonly dealing with construction permits. In Africa, you're growing cities, and if it can take, as it does in many places, 9 months to get a permit to build a building, it kind of slows things down a bit. Getting electricity. How easy is it to get an electricity connection after you apply? Those sorts of things. How easy is it to register property, to get access to finance, to credit? Minority shareholders, those sorts of things we look at. And of course, that vitally important one of trading. How easy is it to get your goods in through the port to where you're going and out to the markets?
What I wanted to ask you though is, given that you've listed these variables, how's South Africa doing? Are we doing badly, given the fact that we are Africa's largest economy? We often hear South African businesses complaining about things like bureaucracy, about how many permits one needs to move something from Cape Town, to Harare and even further up in the continent. Where does South Africa, lie on this list?
South Africa's middling. They were last year, they'd be 41, this year they're 39. They started off when we started this, I think, in the low 20s, like 28, and they've been dropping a little bit. It's not that South Africa is going backwards, it's that the other parts of the world are coming past them. Mm-hmm. So this year, they're now at 39. South Africa is excellent in some areas. If you take the issue of getting credit, mm-hmm. how do you have in place the things which make it easy for banks to give you credit at a reasonable rate? South Africa is number one in the world. Mm-hmm. If you look at the issues on protecting minority investors, South Africa is number 10 in the world. So we're superb. South Africa is superb in those areas. Other areas which is not as good, trading across borders, there have been reforms in that area, and that was where South Africa had a reform this year, but it's not as good. Or getting electricity.
Well, the cost of electricity is burgeoning. It is a big fetter on the growth of particularly small businesses.
We don't even look at that. We only look at how easy is it even to get a connection, and there are 149 economies where it's easier than South Africa to get a connection.
Now, of course, this is a global study. We've been focusing a lot on sub-Saharan Africa and on South Africa. Take us through, the big kind of front runners. I see Singapore tops the global ranking on the ease of doing business for the 7th consecutive year. What is the magic that is in Singapore that we all should have?
Determination. Singapore, as you recall, where they started, cut off from their country next door, their backs to the wall. They said our only way to be successful is if we have a competitive economy. So they were determined to build a competitive economy, and they built this phenomenal economy. And this is the frustration, is they keep getting better every year. They seem to do another reform, and they get better than they were before. So Singapore is very good. The European OECD countries do well. And then there are these lovely South Africa superstars. Rwanda, which year after year has been really moving ahead.
Let's park Rwanda. I mean, Rwanda's come out of a genocide. It has really performed very well. A lot of commentary coming very positive. There's a good environment. There's a willingness from the state to assist the private sector. What's the magic that's working in Rwanda?
Determination. They decided that if they wanted to move ahead, they needed to change the discourse. They didn't want to hear genocide, genocide, genocide. They wanted to hear economy growing and growing. And so they were determined to make reforms, and they did. Let me just give you another thing, though. One of the things which we find in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment is the growth of the continent. Even today, we're talking of 6% growth if you exclude South Africa from sub-Saharan Africa. So apart from South Africa, 6% growth, and much of it is on this reform. It's on access to global markets, it's on Chinese interest, it's on natural resources, but the reform is an important part of the story.